back to Rupert and Pinchy. Good morning, Rupert. How's it going?
Good morning, Pinchy.
Yes,
Going good.
so today we are going to be discussing some ideas on government. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm interested to see how this goes and how long it's going to be. But that's basically all the intro that we really need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good morning. I welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time. I think my guess is, what we're going to be discussing is some things that we've talked about in the past. And as we, in our reading, of Aristotle or some of the ancient writers, and we all of a sudden started to become aware of some things that we didn't realize. So why don't you go ahead and introduce it? What's going on?
Well, first of all, um, Aristotle is one of the great philosophers. I believe
Mm-hmm.
Aquinas calls him the philosopher, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
And some of the ideas of government also go to Aquinas, and that's why people are more aware of it in the Christian circles. And so the basic understanding that I gathered from our research was that there are basically six forms of government in this view. And so basically, when you look up six forms of government, they come out with 10, or like this is a bunch of them, and like there's way more than six. But I think that it all stems from the six. That
Right.
every type of government, and I wouldn't even say that there are six. I would say that it's all based on the three. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because the other ones are bad forms of the three, and so what that is rule of the one, which is monarchy, rule
Mm-hmm.
of the few, which is aristocracy, and then rule of the majority, which is polity or democracy. I don't know which one it is.
It would be probably polity. Democracy is not.
Mm-hmm. And
They
then
they don't just go ahead.
the way that they describe the fourth would be democracy. Wait, not democracy. Would be tyranny, which is rule of the one for his own interest.
Mm-hmm.
Rule of the few would be the next second worst, which
Mm-hmm.
is oligarchy, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically uh, for their own self interest, and then
Mm-hmm.
the majority, which is also for their own self interest, which is democracy. And so basically, they're just repeats, but one is tyrannical forms. I mean, one half is tyrannical forms, and the other one is good forms.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it can be just summarized by three, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so where Aristotle, not just Aristotle, probably people before him or around his time or just after him, um, they reasoned that man was a social animal and that government was natural to man,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And then they reasoned, thinking of that and looking at it, around them, the different countries that have existed or could exist, and how they might be organized. They came up with these basic six that you described, and it's kind of amazing. And then you mentioned Aquinas, and just as a side note, a lot of times natural man will come up with a good idea because guess what? Christians are not the only ones that can see good
You're
ideas,
right.
and but in the non-Christian world or the pagan world, when they come up with a reality that they view in nature because God put it there, a certain uh, Christianity or Christendom will take that, and then they'll baptize it. So a lot
That's
of
what it
times,
said. Yeah.
Aquinas, looked at Aristotle and saw the wisdom that was there, and they say like, Aquinas baptized Aristotle's ideas, and 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 a lot of them are intact, but he just changed a few. So yeah, you'll see the same discussions in Aquinas and some of the others about that Aristotle on those six different governments.
And I'll also say about Aristotle is he was pretty close with almost everything.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty.
It's like
Yeah.
if we're going to talk about just somebody that somehow got so many things right, he's one of those people, and I just think it's kind of amazing. It's not even a Christian background or worldview.
Right.
It's
Right.
I don't even know how you describe it. It's not really in that the same ballpark, but his ideas. I've read some of his works. It's pretty
Hmm.
well done. It's pretty well put together, and I think his view on government was also
Yeah.
pretty
He's just
close.
he's applying or formulating the natural law and seeing things in order and purpose. The world wasn't made in a chaos.
Right.
You know, God is a God of order, and and everything that He makes resembles that order. That kind of is a reflection of Himself.
Hmm.
And so Aristotle and some of the others, and Plato, and they're using their reason and their intellect came so close to understanding um, really in depth things about nature and about um, the nature of God.
Hmm.
And uh, Paul in Romans, kind of says that, kind of confirms that by of looking at the stars and the heavens and all these things, a person can ascertain a lot of truth about God. And
Hmm.
so, anyway, so it's just real interesting. So they identified these governments, and these governments, in essence, all through time and even now today, exist, right,
Hmm.
in some form.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that every single one of the I don't think there's any government that falls outside of these three,
Right,
really. I mean,
right.
when it comes to mixtures and differences and intentions behind people, it becomes different, and that's why there's six forms and not just three in the ideas, because there's three forms that all just are corruptions of the best three, and so I think it's important to realize that we have all these other names, but they
Mm-hmm.
all have to fall in with the rule of one, rule of few, or rule of many. And
Mm-hmm.
that encompasses every single government that has ever existed.
Yeah, and so like you said, these all there might be something some government that is like, for example, an aristocracy, and maybe there's something just a little bit different in their laws or whatever, but foundationally they're operating as an aristocracy, or let's say a monarchy. There's something just a little different in maybe one country where there's a king and queen, and but it's still basically a monarchy. And it's interesting. I mean, it kind of blew me away. This is how maybe poor our education systems are, or maybe my poor ability to absorb what might have been taught in grade school and high school. But I didn't even know the word democracy existed in Aristotle's time. I,
Right,
you
right.
know, we kind of thought that democracy was something that
It was
Thomas Jefferson
just
came up
recently
with.
tried. That's what it
Hmm.
seems like. Everybody's like, oh, democracy is the sophisticated way of ruling a country. And it's like, this is thousands of years old. You're not thinking of anything new. I'm just saying. And democracy has been tried so many times, and it almost always fails,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
unfortunate. But
Yeah.
But part of that reasoning that is also stated in the article that I just read was talking about how the reasoning that Aquinas put out was that the first best form of government is monarchy, which
Hmm.
is basically um, ruled by one that's a good person, and he can get things done faster than anyone else can. And then he also puts forward the idea that then aristocracy is the next best form because it still is good people and are good people. They're still good people. And it's a little slower than a monarchy, but it can get things done. And then he puts that democracy or polity is a slower form of the good forms, and that it
Mm-hmm.
still is good people, but it's hard to get things done. And then
Mm-hmm.
he reasons that then below that we have democracy, which
Mm-hmm.
is the bad form of polity or democracy, which is for their own self interest and it takes forever to do things. So that one's
Mm-hmm.
a little better because it takes longer for things to get bad. And then after that, we have the next best form, or worst form, I guess, because we're going down the
Yeah.
list. The
Right.
next worst is, hold on, I'm sorry, I'm getting it.
No, you're good.
Oh, is the oligarchy, because
Mm-hmm.
things are going faster in the wrong direction. And then we have monarchy, or tyranny, which is just he can get things done so fast and do bad things. And so
Mm-hmm.
basically, he has a ranking of best to worst, and I don't necessarily know if I agree with it. And the only reason
Well,
why I
okay.
say that is because
Mm-hmm.
is it good that it goes faster?
Well, okay. Uh, l- let me answer your question. It can be good at times if it goes faster. There's times it's better for longer deliberation, and what does that scripture say? There's wisdom in the multitude of counselors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes we think that when we think of monarchy, we think that that monarchy is a tyrant, and can be. We'll get to that,
Well,
but
doesn't it just easily
uh,
become tyranny?
it can. But it's foolish to think that there's a king that doesn't have a court that he considers maybe what other nobles might
Right.
suggest before he makes his final decision. But but Aquinas states that he gives pride of first place to monarchy because not that it functions the best in this world per se, but that it reflects the reality of heaven the closest. And so he just like, you know, by default says, heaven is like a monarchy, you know,
Well, it
in
absolutely
our
is a monarchy, but does that mean that it's good in the physical realm?
well, you could reason that out and say, uh, well, let me just say, okay, that's the next subject. He's just recognizing that monarchy in heaven is glorious,
Right.
and regardless, he's going to say that monarchy is the pride of first place in primacy in this world because it reflects heaven the closest. The problem with all the forms of government is when they turn their back on nature's God.
Right. So it's dependent on morality. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and so regardless of there are forms, and we're going to talk about, and like you said, you gave the three forms of government as what Aristotle or Aquinas or others would say is the good forms of government, and some people will differ on maybe what one is second or third, but they think
Right.
these are reasonable forms of government, and then they have these on the other side. These are unreasonable in forms of government. Just be, just because they're unreasonable doesn't mean they don't exist.
Right.
They're identifying the ones in the world that do exist. And so anyway, so monarchy is that, and then that's why he puts it in first place, so to speak. But he would agree, Aquinas would agree that if you got a corrupt monarch and a corrupt court of the king, it'd be much better to have one of the other good forms of government.
Right. And that's why he has the list go from basically the good form of monarchy and then the bad form of monarchy is all the way at the bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's because of
Mm-hmm.
that tyranny. And so that's why I ask, is it really better that there be one ruler? Because the reason why I say that is because don't we want things to go slower so that it doesn't just flip every single time a new king is there? That all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden we lost all our freedom, and then all of a sudden we have all our freedom back. Isn't that almost kind of worse than just going slower?
Well, uh, when if we look at our example of in Israel,
Right.
in the kings of Judah, um, there are only three good kings named out of all the kings,
That's a
and
good example.
there is a few good kings in the which one is the northern kingdom?
Oh goodness.
Is it Israel or Judah? But anyway, the other one, Israel, they had good kings as well, but not very many. But the thing about the kings are, one could argue to answer your question by not answering it and just maybe go adding to your question is if you have a king that lives 50 years or 40 years or reigns 40 years and he's a good king, that would be just a glorious kingdom.
Right. It would be.
And um, what's interesting is, Solomon. A lot of people are surprised that Solomon is not included in
The
the
list.
good kings of yeah. Of course, he was king over the united Israel, but they're surprised he's not in the list of a good king. But during the time of um, Solomon, there was a lot of peace
Right.
and great prosperity. And so, but he's still not looked upon as a good king because he led them down the path of idolatry
Right.
um, through the sins of the flesh. But so, answering your question, we can't. When we think of a king, it's not like our president that uh, an election every 4 years.
Right.
You know, and then if you have one party in that thinks it's good
Oh,
to paint everything,
that is
but
true because it doesn't just flip as super often, but I mean, if
so
somebody, yeah,
so let me give an argument for why it's good. I'm not sure it's the best. I would be fine with it with any of the good forms of government if we had a virtuous, godly people.
yeah,
But
absolutely, that's what it's
yeah,
dependent on.
yeah. So, but if you had let's say you had a good monarch and he's going to be in there for 40 years and he's a good monarch, then he's more than likely raising his children and preparing him if a monarchy, uh, I would guess maybe you know this answer. Monarchy always has a family line, perhaps.
Right.
I mean, they
That's typically how they pass it on. At least that's what I've
that's
seen.
typically so he's preparing his sons to be good kings, and so even though his reign might last 40, well then if a good son comes into power, that 40 turns into another 40. So now we got 80 years
Hmm.
of blessedness. That's kind of 80 years of real good prosperity. That's a good run, you know. Now we look at again at the kings of Judah. You can have a really good king, and you think, oh, great, this has been a 40-year reign of Josiah. This is going to be really good because his son's going to be really great. Well, his son comes along, and he's terrible,
Oh my
right?
goodness, yeah.
Yeah, but you go back to our situation where we have elected president every 4 years, and um, they're practically campaigning 2 of the years that they're in office,
Hmm.
and so they're not even really ruling, and they're not ruling as a king. But anyway, so there are some real good advantages. And that's what Aristotle, and maybe that's what you want to go through too. But there's good advantages and disadvantages in every every good form of government.
I have a question though about the election thing. Do you think it would be better to have a longer term as a president if you picked
Um,
someone for the job?
well, I believe some senators, maybe all of them, are 6 year. Um,
Right, yeah, I know, but I'm talking about the president.
so, and I would say that's not as would it be beneficial? I don't think it would be unbeneficial or beneficial. I don't think it would be neutral because the way our government forms, we have a Congress with a Senate and a House that kind of balance out whatever that whoever is in the office of the president.
Hmm.
So, for example, when you think of Bill Clinton, who's not one of our favorites or one of our guys. Um, some good things got done during his
Right.
presidency because there was a good Congress.
Right, it wasn't because of him, it was because of the Congress.
Right, but he operated within his bounds as president, and the Congress, the Senate and the House, operated well and in good order, and got some good things passed
Right.
for example, welfare reform and different things like that. And there's no way that a Democratic government or a Democratic president would ever have done
Right.
welfare reform.
Right.
But the Republicans did a really good job on that, and he passed it. So because of the checks and balances of our three branches of government, if it was longer, I wouldn't be against that. Maybe that would make people really think about what they're voting for more,
Hmm.
right? Because if you think, oh well, if he's bad, we'll just vote him out in 4 years. Well, what if you have him 8 years?
You think
You know,
harder.
or what if you
Right.
have her? You know, if you vote in a woman, um, what if that's great if she's Margaret Thatcher, but what if she's not Margaret Thatcher or someone
Hmm.
like that? Oh,
So where would
anyway,
you place our government on the
I
forms?
believe it's a polity. It's more of a polity, don't you think? If you look at, if we're gonna, they say polity and they don't spell out a republic.
Mm, right.
And I'm just thinking that when they're talking about, so you have monarch, aristocracy, and the aristocracy is a lot like a monarchy. It's in a sense because it's high virtuous people that are very educated, a group of people running a country, right? And and aristocracy is kind of the oligarchy is the flip side of aristocracy. Aristocracy is running. They're well to do. They're very educated, and they're running a country for the good of the country.
Hmm.
An oligarchy might be smart, but they're definitely wealthy, and they're running it for the benefit of themselves
Hmm.
as a group. And so, anyway, so the polity I would say is, and you said democracy is in the good list and the bad list, and so we need to clarify that, right? Don't you think?
Well,
Did you put
well, I
democracy
said
as a
it
list in the?
twice, but that was because I was trying to figure out what the word is used that's the opposite. Because basically, if you were to talk about it, okay, it's basically repeating the same list twice,
Mm-hmm.
but one side is the good forms and one side is the bad forms, and they have different words for them. So that's why I was just
Okay.
confused. Is that
Well,
polity is
so
the good form of democracy?
yeah, so it'd be a democratic republic. Probably would be maybe a polity.
Hmm.
Maybe there's another form,
Well, the
but
original idea would have been, I believe their governments weren't as big in some places that it wouldn't exactly be the same exact thing as a republic. I don't
well,
think.
maybe it would be good to mention why democracy is listed in the bad.
Well, all of them are listed in the bad.
Yeah, in their flip side.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things you wanted to highlight how interesting is what's going on. But anyway,
Well, I do have the question though about our government because couldn't we just say that it's a polity because we have kind of like a monarch, not really. I mean, the president has a lot more power than he used to have, but isn't there kind of like a mixture in some sense?
well, uh, oh, you can draw those kind of distinct or
Parallels? Yeah.
similarities, but it's definitely not a monarchy,
Right.
uh, but a polity, and basically a polity is simply democracy modified, not democracy in its pure form.
Right.
Don't you think?
Right, yes. And the only reason why I'd be hesitant to necessarily say that we're solely a polity, or I mean, I guess
That
I could
that
say
we
we
are.
are basically
Yeah.
a polity. But the
Hmm.
reason why I'm more hesitant to just say polity is because um, the way that the government is set up isn't entirely based on popular vote.
No, no. There's checks in. It's a modified democracy
Right.
because. So let's talk about the democracy in the bad list of the three bad forms of government. When that democracy is listed, I think Aristotle doesn't he call it a vicious form of government?
I'm not sure.
Um, he uses certain terminologies, and it's very interesting. And basically, democracy as mob rule, meaning the majority rules, is is a vicious. It will always go to viciousness, is what Aristotle would explain. Is that a democracy can start out with the best intentions, but it will always lead to viciousness, because if I have a company and I'm going to run my company on pure democracy, then if 51% of my workforce votes that 49% have to work and they get to stay home and still get paid, you can see that's basically where democracy goes, pure democracy.
But
And
what
someone
about
can
the
say,
other ones? Don't they just as easily turn?
well, who?
Well,
What?
like aristocracy, can't that easily turn just like democracy?
It can, but there's more checks and balances. So for example, someone can say, well, okay, so in pure democracy, what if we had all virtuous people? Okay, okay, yeah, that would work.
Right.
But guess what? Even though Aristotle wasn't a Christian, he understood original sin,
Mm-hmm.
and he knew that democracy would go that man is a certain way, and that man, if they're given the opportunity and also the some coercion and some correction and some laws, can be a good and become good and virtuous.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's no checks and balances, man will, not do that.
Right,
And
and I
so,
think it comes down to the sinfulness of man. When you give the majority power, sin typically overrules because man is inclined to sin. So
mhm,
if you have one individual, there's
right,
I think the reasoning is that you have less people. That means that there's less chance that they're evil. and,
right.
and
So,
and I don't know if it's Plato or whatever, but I've heard the statement that somebody said that basically the monarch should not want to be the monarch, and that's how you ensure that you have a stable monarchy.
you have a good monarchy, yeah. So, okay, now, so with your question about our government and what it looks like, maybe you're pointing out kind of where the direction you wanted to go with this, and I find that interesting. I think you can show all the forms operating in our country right now in the
Mhm.
United States. And it's not we don't have I mean, there's no monarchy. We're not There's not a monarchy. There's never been one.
Right.
There's no aristocracy. There's never been one. But it's been growing, perhaps, and maybe that's what you're pointing out. That now, when we look at our government, we kind of see um, those types of forms of government seeming, like the president acting like a king.
Right,
And
and the only thing I would say is, I wanted to point out that there are aspects of the checks and balances that is based on the three forms. We have a president, which
hmm
he has certain things that he does, and
hmm
that's one individual. It's not multiple. And then we
hmm
have kind of like an aristocracy when it comes to the Senate, which no longer stands because the states do not pick their senators. The people in the states pick their senators.
hmm
So that's based on
hmm
popular vote now, which it shouldn't be, but whatever. Um, and then we have the representatives, which is supposed to be like a check on democracy. That
hmm
it's not just a direct democracy. There's some um, intermediaries, or there's an in between. Okay, there's not just everyone making all the decisions. It's
Right.
it's it's put into the hands of fewer people. And
Right.
so, all I was wanting to point out is that it does seem like there are some aspects that are supposed to be based on those forms of government, and I think that um, the intent was to try to maintain what one guy thinks is good for the country, what these people think is good for the country, what these people to think, and it seems like they actually wanted it to go slow,
hmm
really slow,
hmm
right? That's what it seems like they
hmm
wanted to happen. And so, what
hmm
happens when you reach a certain point? It seems like everyone's going there for selfish gain now, and that they
hmm
all have the same intention. It's not that they
hmm
actually care, or it doesn't seem like it as much. But that's when you're talking about that there's a good legislature, but there's a bad president. That just shows that there's some conflict, and that seems to be what they intended to. Would you say that?
Yeah. Yeah. They definitely intended that. Sure. Um, and so the one thing is you mentioned, like some people, they say that they're trying to do what's good for the country. Okay. And maybe they make a mistake. But we were supposed to trust their goodwill, that they're doing it for good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, that's fine and good. I mean, we do hope for goodwill from anyone we may meet. But if, for example, my neighbor is like, I don't know, he does something that causes one of my walls in my house to fall down, and he goes, "Oh, sorry, I was just intending that to help strengthen the wall," and I go, "Okay, all right, okay, thanks, Jim." And then the next week, part of my roof is destroyed, and then Jim goes, "Oh, I'm, I was just trying to maybe make your roof bigger and have it go out farther, so it'd be really nice to have a patio." Okay, Jim. Okay, all right. And then next week, your basement floods, and so what I'm saying is that once you start seeing someone or a leader or a group, everything they do, if it is always a detriment or it's always a mistake, that is showing intention.
Mm-hmm.
That is showing that there's not goodwill and there's another purpose in it.
Mm-hmm.
And generally the purpose will be power and money. Jim owns the construction company. And so every time I have to fix my house, Jim is making money. So anyway, so
Right,
maybe that's not where you
and
want to go. But
I guess I should maybe change what I said a little bit. So there's kind of a tug of war, and the point I think is that there would be good people and to try to balance out the government. What I mean by that is we have chances of there being good people in the Senate and the representative and in the presidency, and that we wouldn't just go in one straight direction And so
Hmm.
what it seems like we've come to is if everybody is all self-interest, then they're going to
Hmm.
find that it's easiest to give themselves more power, more money, more things like that, and they're not actually trying to help anyone. So if
Hmm.
they all have the same interest, which is self-interest, then they're
Hmm.
all going to do the same thing, basically.
Hmm.
And so I think it's important to realize that it seems like we the attempt was that not everyone would be bad in the government at the same time. But
Right.
then
Well,
when
they
you
yeah
do,
they
then it becomes all self-interest and they all end up doing the same thing.
yeah they knew that our founders knew that uh, you know a lawn doesn't stay looking good and being weedless and being mowed properly and being watered properly and whatnot by itself. It requires a lot of work,
Right.
but it might be a really good lawn. And so our framers were very, very concerned about putting in a lot of checks and balances. When NASA sends up a rocket into space, they have like I don't know how many redundant computer systems. If this one fails, we got this next computer.
Right.
If that one fails, we got this computer. So our framers, it's not so much a redundant because they're all supposed to work together, but they're supposed to provide checks and balances.
Right.
And so, because they knew the nature of man, that man who might tend to be non-virtuous will become corrupt,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's going to be some corruption always. How can we lessen the impact and protect? And so that was our form of government, local representation. You know, uh, the power goes out to the closest person, the closest spot of where the people are being ruled. And that's what de Tocqueville, when he came and surveyed our country, he was so amazed that the locals knew their representatives and then knew their senators and that they lived close and those kinds of things. Because it used to be, or it still is in some places, where the person ruling you is 2,000 miles away. They don't live in your area.
Mm-hmm.
And so local representation and also a certain, not just a small group of people, but a larger group of people running things, but not too large because then you're never gonna. It's the arguments are gonna get. Everyone wants to have a say, and so you have to have a certain amount. And so I think that's. I mean, they were obviously thinking about that and worried about that. And so now, so if you look at what would be the opposite, then kind of, or the flip side of a monarchy would be the tyrant, right,
Mm-hmm.
or the dictator
Yeah.
on the bad side of government. And there are governments that have that.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's just a bad person in the office. It's about. I think the biggest downfall of government is just immorality. I think that's obviously the biggest weakness is that man is sinful.
Hmm.
You would agree with that absolutely, and so um, that's what a downfall of a monarchy is the dictator who's doing things for himself. And I forgot who it was that said, but that the government that the founders set up would only work with a moral and upright
Virtuous
people.
people. Yeah.
And
Uh,
I
yeah.
would say that applies to every single government that has ever existed.
Hmm. Right. And so, so you look at the monarchy and you say, okay, when it devolves or when it becomes corrupt, generally it becomes a tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
When polity, a
Polity.
what would you call a democratic republic, or what I want to say, a modified democracy, with when it goes corrupt, it goes to a pure democracy, which becomes mob rules.
Yeah.
And then when you think of the aristocracy, when that becomes corrupt, you get to the oligarchy. Now you had mentioned to me, I don't know if it was last week, but I think it's true. Our government or our country currently is kind of showing
Signs of
all
those,
three
yeah,
bad forms of government.
yeah.
You know, our the oligarchy is big tech, big business, running things, deciding things, um, and maybe owning senators and representatives that vote
Mm-hmm.
always in their view,
Yeah.
even though that senator still exists and that House member still exists. You might as well have somebody from the board of Google on there or the board of whatever. And then you look at the presidency, and you think now we have a corrupt monarchy, like I already said, to become a tyranny. And then so it's like we have our system has kind of flipped over and become the worst of each.
Oh, absolutely. And I think big tech's basic what they're trying to do is they're trying to corrupt the people, which is going to give them more power, and the president more power as well. It's just it seems like it's all an attempt to bring it all in their direction, um,
Hmm.
and that people are just being selfish, and that they're just trying to get more power, and that's basically what happens with all the bad
Hmm.
forms. Is it's all self interest, not common interest, as it's
Right.
put. But I think even common interest can be a problem. Um,
What do you mean?
well, in a democracy, common interest can
Right.
be a problem, and
Okay.
so common interest isn't necessarily the good form. I think the good form would be morality under God. It would be for the
Hmm.
um, God interest, not necessarily common
Hmm.
interest, because common interest isn't necessarily good.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But that's how they
Well, the
put it. That's how it seems like it's put uh, when explaining Aristotle. Is that
right.
he says that it's for the common interest, and I would say that's not necessarily completely true. But yes, I see where he's going with it.
Right. Well, so when you say, big tech, for example, uh, wanting to corrupt people, that's a result. But really, what they want to do is steer people in order to steer more money to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if that means giving them what is bad or what will corrupt them, they're fine with that. You know.
Right.
And so, but their goal is not. Their goal is simply money and control. And so, anyway.
Yeah, and I do want to touch on just more about the immorality thing. So, um, it seems like, oh, what was I going to say about it? I was thinking about it earlier, but I forgot.
Well, the one we mentioned at the very beginning that governments, Aristotle and thinking persons could look and see that
Thinking
man is
persons, yeah.
yeah, man is a social animal, and that a certain government or interaction in society is natural to man. And we said that, well, the reason why they can see that is because God made the world in order, and the Lord says that in the scriptures that He sets up governments and He tears governments down. Bottom line, there's a government running everything, and that's called the Lord is the supreme governor of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and His providence is carrying the world in His hands. And someone can say, well, what about these bad forms of government? They're rejecting God, and it's like, yeah, there's a solution to that. God's already has that in mind.
Right.
When governments become corrupt, they implode like Rome.
Right.
They fall, and great is their fall. And so does He want governments to fall and corrupt and have all that suffering? No, but it doesn't. But there's already so anyway. Um, God is the governor of the world, and regardless if we have a good government or bad government, He's still guiding the world. And if a country rejects God, then they're rejecting truth, and if they reject truth, no matter what form of government you have, you're going to fall. And is that where you're going? Just
Oh
like the
yeah, that's
condition
basically what I'm
that we
thinking. It's
are?
just the morality, and that's the biggest worry for me, though. Is even though God has it under control, um, if we're considering that we're in a bad position with the
Hmm.
morality, then I would worry the downfall about the downfall.
Oh yeah, I think we should be very worried, and do like we have said in different podcasts that. So, are we doom and gloom? It's like no, we want to be realists. Remember, we don't
We
want,
want to be
and a
realistic,
realist is
yeah.
just um, we don't necessarily want to be a realist. We want to be a global citizen or galactic citizen. How did
Galactic
Chesterton
Patriot.
put it? That's it. There you go, galactic patriot. We want to be a galactic patriot and fight, knowing that yeah, people things are going to be bad, but we only have one choice, and that's to try to do our best to make it good. We can't spend our focus on seeing all the bad. We need to do the small things, and those small things will become bigger things, and those bigger things will grow. But we have to start with understanding.
Hmm.
And so, what always I always cringed when you wanted to do this podcast on just discussing some forms of government. I've always cringed when I've heard our leaders talk about promoting democracy around the
Yeah,
world.
me too.
It's like, you know, don't you know there are communist countries that call themselves a democracy? You know, uh, we're not a democracy, and
Well, I think
I mean,
also I've also heard somebody say direct democracy, and I'm like, ah,
wow.
that is the worst form of democracy. I don't know what you're talking about.
And they really mean it too. They
But I
really
heard
mean
that
it.
from a
It's
Republican, and I'm like, okay,
well, and the thing is, they're saying promoting democracy around the world. It's like, uh, okay, first of all, as our founders envisioned it, fine.
right.
As we're operating now, no, not fine.
No, or yeah, absolutely.
And uh, I've always cringed when I hear, "Oh, we're a democracy." It's like, no,
Kind of, not
we're
exactly.
actually a republic,
Right, right, right. Right,
And
it's like
so,
democracy in their way is not a good form.
well, yeah. So, Democrats win. Let's just say if in legitimate elections, Democrats win the presidency once in a while, right? But they want to win every election, okay? Which someone can say, well, okay, that's fine. They want to. I mean, a person always wants to win. That's not necessarily a negative thing. I'm like, okay, but within reason. For example, if I go out onto the football field, yeah, I want to, and playing for one team, I want that team to win every time. But I'm not gonna cheat and poison the other team's water and do different things, right? I'm gonna want to win. So anyway, the Democrats want to win every time,
Yeah, and I'd say
and
that the biggest problem is they want to win for their own self interest.
right, and so they've looked at the numbers and they see that certain states have so many people that tend to vote Democratic for some unknown reason. Um,
Because it's easy.
and they realized that if they could get rid of the Electoral College, which balances out, the Electoral College is to balance out so New York doesn't end up ruling what North Dakota does, simply because they have more people.
Right.
It's a brilliant. Our electoral college is a brilliant system. Brilliant. It's one of the most fairest ways to vote for a national
Hmm.
election as for the president. But anyway, Democrats want to get rid of that because by getting rid of that, basically they're going to become
They would win every time.
yeah, and it'd be a pure democracy. Then it's just 51% of the vote. So, um, anyway,
Good conversation. I think we're
okay, yeah, I
pretty
don't have
good.
much more to say. Yeah, I just wanted to talk to you about that. So cool. All right, well, hey, Pinchy, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank everyone for listening, and Godspeed.
Have a good week.